Pope Francis and President Biden made headlines after meeting in Rome last week. Did the Pope give the pro-choice Catholic president a pass on communion? The Papal Posse, Robert Royal and Father GERALD Murray, are here with analysis. Fox News host and New York Times best-selling author Brian Kilmeade shares his new book, The President and the Freedom Fighter, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and their battle to save America's soul. And we continue to celebrate our 25th anniversary with some very special world over moments we just couldn't fit into last week's show. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We have an important show for you tonight. If you'd like to comment, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover. But first, some news. A trial began this week for Jimmy Lai, the Chinese dissident, media tycoon, and devoted Catholic. The Chinese Communist government is charging Lai and 7 others with incitement and unlawful assembly over their role in the unauthorized Tiananmen Square vigil last year. Lai has pleaded not guilty to the charges. Earlier this year, communist authorities shut down Lai's Hong Kong-based pro-democracy newspaper, Apple Daily. Rather than fleeing China for Europe or the United States, Jimmy Lai submitted to Chinese communist authorities and remains in prison. Please pray for him, the Lai family. Keep them all in your prayers. Last week, while we were celebrating a quarter century of a certain television program, Pope Francis met with U.S. President Joe Biden at the Vatican. The meeting has drawn much controversy due to the president's well-known public support of abortion on demand. What did Pope Francis and Biden really discuss, and what does it mean? Joining me now to discuss all this and much more is the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of The Catholic Thing, Robert Royal in Washington, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father GERALD Murray, joins us from Manhattan. Gents, thanks for being here. Prior to that papal presidential meetup, the Vatican abruptly canceled the planned live broadcast of the event, limiting it to just the president's arrival at the Apostolic Palace. Now, Vatican spokesman Matteo Bruni said the cancellation reflected the normal procedure established during the pandemic for all visiting heads of state. Father Jerry, what do you make of that last-minute cancellation by the Vatican and the later release of those edited clips?
Well, last-minute cancellation means they did something different than what they said they would do. They had to have a reason, and the reason they gave can't be true because the thing had been planned and it was clear Biden, the head of state, was coming. My guess is it's information control, that they wanted to control the images that would be displayed before the public of how the Pope and the President were interacting, because naturally comparisons will be made with how Pope Francis treated President Trump when he was there during his presidency. And, you know, as we know, this meeting ended up being twice as long as originally planned. So obviously there was a good spirit of camaraderie and conversation going on. It would be good if we got to see the whole thing, but we didn't. So in the modern age, in the media age, transparency and upfrontness is the best thing, particularly when it has to do with something that is as important as a president meeting a pope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my guess is this was all to protect Biden and limit any fallout from an aside or something he said. By the way, this is the sort of bizarre interaction that they did release. Watch.
With your permission, I'd like to be able to give you a coin. You have to buy the drinks. Now, I'm the only Irishman you've ever met who's never had a drink.
Bob, what do you make of what the Vatican chose to release of this meeting? And does their decision to control coverage have something to do with the upcoming bishops' meeting here in the United States set for later this month concerning Eucharistic coherence and those who are worthy to receive the Eucharist?
Yeah, it seemed to me that, in addition to what Father said, there's also some nervousness on the Vatican side because they know that these images can be manipulated by politicians after they come out. It's happened frequently, in fact, with this papacy. And then the Vatican press office is put in the awkward position of trying to explain what actually happened. Look, it looked to me like they were very cheery together. And my sense is that that is by mutual consent. They wanted it to look like a cordial get-together. But for me, this is not only a kind of a prelude to the bishops' meeting in a week or so, at a moment when they're debating what exactly Eucharistic coherence is going to mean. We've got a draft of that document that's been released. It's a very good document in its way, but it doesn't really deal substantially with what it means for a politician like Biden. At the same time, it seems to me that this meeting with the Pope, just the fact of the two of them meeting in a year in which our Supreme Court is very likely to consider overturning Roe v. Wade, sends a wrong message in the American political system. So we've got, on the one hand, we've got this cheeriness in this meeting that our bishops are looking at, and on the other, in our political realm, it looks like the Pope of Rome is okay with the most powerful political leader in the world, who is a Catholic and is promoting abortion and other things more vigorously, attempting to pay for them with taxpayer dollars than any president in the history of the United States.
I want you to watch this. During a press event with the Italian Prime Minister following his meeting with Pope Francis, President Biden was asked if the issue of abortion had come up during his conversation with the Pope.
No, it didn't. It came up and just talked about the fact that he was happy I was a good Catholic and keep receiving communion.
He said that you should keep receiving communion.
Yeah.
No, it didn't. It came up. So Biden doesn't seem to have a firm grasp of what was discussed. Nonetheless, this has made a real splash because, as I said before this visit, practice is more important than whatever the stated teaching is, and Biden is trying to teach here. He's trying to teach that you can move and say whatever you'd like on abortion as a politician and still be a good Catholic and receive communion. Father Jerry, Bishop Olson, a member of the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Doctrine, said the president's comments add to the problem created by his public dissent from the church on abortion, and, quote, now the president is no longer simply taking communion in this confused sense. He's saying the Pope is advocating for this confusion. That in itself is a scandal. Father Jerry, your reaction?
Well, the bishop is right, and, I'll say this. Since the Pope's words were not recorded, we can't verify them against President Biden's characterization. On the other hand, after President Biden said this and was widely reported, the Holy See press office refused to either confirm or deny that it was true, characterizing it as a private conversation. Well, the Holy See also issued a press release about the meeting in which they talked about climate change and migration and COVID. So, the things that they wanted to make public, they did, which is the Pope's great concern for those issues, which President Biden shares. But on the matter of Holy Communion, which is a very serious issue, the president himself was left to give the impression of the whole world that the Pope is perfectly fine with him receiving communion, even though he's promoting abortion, as Bob said, and wanting us to pay for it. So there is a scandal going on here, and let's just be honest, this is most regrettable that this statement by Biden not only was made, but that the Holy See did not contradict it, which leads to the conclusion that Biden probably got it right, and that's really unfortunate because, in point of fact, President Biden should not be receiving communion. I guess we'll talk about that when the bishop's document comes up.
All right. Yeah. Well, Father, as you said, the Vatican dismissed this as a private conversation. They refused to clarify. But the President of the United States is claiming that the Pope told him he's a good Catholic, even if he pushes the most extreme measures on abortion, and is facing rebuke from his own bishops at home. But, Bob, is this meant to check the U.S. bishops as they debate how to deal with Catholics in public life who dissent from church teaching continuously?
Well, I think the very fact that he met with Biden already makes some kind of statement like that. Maybe he doesn't want to make a direct appeal to the bishops not to move against Biden receiving communion. But look, I've got to say that I find Biden's statement internally contradictory. Because if abortion was not discussed, why in the world would the Pope tell him how he's a good Catholic and to continue to receive communion? I mean, certainly, the Pope and his closest advisors know very little about the United States. And what they know, they don't particularly like, frankly. But they must all know, and they must have briefed him on the fact of how sensitive this question is in the United States right now. The Pope has kind of given off messages, indirect messages in the past that he doesn't like to see communion being withheld from anyone. But why would Biden be told, if indeed he was told, that he was a good Catholic and could receive communion, if that question of abortion did not come up? And I agree with Father entirely. If it did come up, and the press office is not saying that it did, this is already a scandal. If it didn't come up in another way, it's a dereliction, it seems to me, of the duty of the Pope to tell the most powerful political leader in the world that his promotion of the slaughter of the innocents, more children die in abortion around the world than in any other way. There are 60 million abortions around the world every year. So you want to talk about the dangers from climate change, the dangers to refugees and whatnot. Yes, those are all considerations that we have to take seriously. But this is front and center and a massive destruction of human life. Any Pope should be talking about this to any world leader that he meets.
Biden received communion a day after the papal visit at St. Patrick's American Church in Rome. The rector of the church, Fr.Steven Petroff, said,
"I'm not the Eucharist police. The Eucharist is, as Pope Francis and many popes have said, medicine for those who need it, who is everyone, all of us." So it wasn't difficult, no. And again, I'm following the direction or the great example that Pope Francis has given. But again, my own priestly instruction that the Eucharist is to be shared.
Father Jerry, is the Eucharist just to be shared with everybody? Has canon law been abrogated due to the great example of Pope Francis, quoting Father there?
No, canon law, of course, retains its force, but, of course, law has to be enforced, and I regret to say Father is misinformed. As pastor of souls in the Church, he is responsible for Canon 915, which says that those who persist obstinately in manifest grave sin are not to be administered Holy Communion. Now, he says he's not there to be the police. Well, let's be honest. If an absurd case happened, for instance, a Catholic group of Ku Klux Klansmen came into church wearing their uniform and came up for communion, I seriously doubt he would give communion, and he shouldn't, because those people obviously are doing something horrendous. In the case of President Biden, the facts, as Bob stated them, are quite clear. The president wants to receive communion, which is a good desire, but he has to be told, until you conform your life to Christ and his teaching, you are endangering not only your own soul, but giving scandal to others. And that's why Canon 915 is there. The pastors of the church are not passive administrators. They are guardians of the Holy Eucharist, and they have the eternal welfare of the people in sight. That's their goal. I mean, we have to tell President Biden and others, promoting the killing of unborn children deeply offends God, and you do not want to go before God at the moment of your death and try to explain to him why you did this, because the Lord has made it clear, thou shalt not kill.
Bob, when I saw the president and the Pope side by side when the video was first released of this meeting, I said, let me be clear on what you're seeing here. You are seeing the two primary teachers of Catholicism in the world today. One responsible for doctrine, the other who de facto is responsible for practice of the faith. And though they may not recognize it, they are in opposition. Your thoughts when you heard the local priest say that, and of this entire affair, and the ramifications for the laity?
Well, Father mentioned the term scandal. And in the bishop's draft document, the one that they're going to debate in a couple of weeks, the word scandal is only mentioned once and it isn't explained. Now, for most Catholics these days, scandal just means, you know, something notorious happened and it's become widespread in the media, and so it's bad, but it's just, somebody misbehaved. Technically, in Catholicism, a scandal means a stumbling block. In other words, not only is the fact that President Biden is allowed to receive communion bad for him, bad for the state of his soul, he presents an example, a stumbling block, and even if it's indirect, leading others, politicians, maybe private people in their own individual lives, they get the impression that this is okay, and no one takes the trouble to rebuke them about this. So, it's bad enough that he's endangering his own soul, and, given his age and his general health, it isn't going to be long before he's standing before the Lord. But the legacy that he's going to leave after he's left this earth as an example to other people in this country and around the world, that you can be the largest promoter of abortion in the world and yet meet with the Holy Father and it's all smiles and pleasantness.
Gentlemen, I want to move on. This week at his Wednesday audience, Pope Francis addressed the topic of fraternal correction and the problem of criticizing others. He said, quote, "How easy it is to criticize others. There are some people who seem to have a degree in tattling, criticizing others every day. Hey, look in the mirror and reflect on one's own weakness and fragility." Later in the address, Francis urges us to tolerate the problems and defects of others, quote, "in silence and prayer in order to find the right path for helping them correct themselves." Bob, and then Father, your thoughts on this, and what's the Pope getting at here?
Well, I wish I could say that I knew, because to me this is rather confusing. The Holy Father himself talks about the way that certain countries in Europe are closed off to refugees. He talks about the greediness, the way the economic system in the world is organized toward profit rather than helping people. Look, it's simply part of being a human being. Yes, I mean, we don't want to be gossiping. And when he talks about that, I'm with him 100%, because I think backbiting and gossiping and envy, these things are very, very destructive. And the fact that they're kind of private and we don't see them publicly is one thing. But it's simply the case that a person in public who is going to be presenting positions, policies, future pathways, is going to have to be in dialogue and sometimes take sharp criticism for the kinds of positions that he or she takes. And so, look, there's a good side to this, but it seems to me that there's a way in which also this is a kind of a further extension of his desire to tell people that they shouldn't be criticizing what he's doing too much.
Father Jerry?
I think Bob's got a good point there. I agree with that. And it's something that we have to distinguish because, of course, we don't want to get into constant arguments or criticism in interpersonal relationships. But when the good of the community is at stake, that's when we need this gospel frankness, which would lead us to say, when I pose an argument, I will avoid name-calling, but I will also try to examine the evidence and the reasons given for policies. And to take the example of the Latin Mass document that the Pope gave, the reasons that the Pope gave for issuing that document are being undermined as we speak by evidence which has leaked out that there was no big problem in the world about the Latin Mass. So therefore, to go back to the Holy Father and say, Holy Father, really, we want you to reconsider that decision because we don't think it was based on evidence. And we think that the reaction of the Latin Mass community is to show that they are deeply wounded because they're being characterized as divisive, when in fact they are devout Catholics who want to be in union with the Pope and with the rest of the bishops.
Yeah. I want to pick up on that because that story is related to another that I want to tackle here. The Vatican has announced that it is extending the deadline for dioceses to turn in their input to the Synod of Bishops. Now, the deadline moved from April 2022 to August 2022. In the initial process, members of parishes and dioceses, religious orders, Catholic movements were asked to consider ways in which they currently experience the Church as, quote, synodal. A note was put out by the Synod Office on October 29th. It read that during this period, we've heard over and over again, and from many quarters, the request to extend the duration of this first phase of the synodal process in order to provide a greater opportunity for the people of God to have an authentic experience of listening and dialogue. Bob, you were in Rome less than a month ago for the opening of this synod. Is this extension an admission that few dioceses were actually doing anything vis-a-vis this synod?
Well, there have been scattered reports that there are dioceses in which people have not even really heard that there is a synodal way being pursued at this point. And I think that to connect it back a little bit with the traditional Latin Mass that Father was talking about, this seems to be, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of enthusiasm in many places about these changes, just as there was not an immediate standing up of bishops around the world saying, thank you, Holy Father, you've rescued us from those horrible TLM people. I don't see any great enthusiasm in my own diocese or as I look around in the Catholic world for what seems to be a very amorphous, hard to pin down process. If all you're going to do is ask people about what they want in the future, you're going to be all over the place, and it's eventually going to have to be disciplined by someone eventually in Rome. And I think that there are both possibilities that could come out of a synodal discussion, but I also fear that this is ultimately going to be, if we want to put it this way, manipulated or rigged or shaped in a way at the end that suits the purposes of certain high offices in the Holy See.
Well, I want to pick up on that idea of polling the world. As Father alluded to earlier, Diana Montagna has reported new facts emerging regarding the Pope's motu proprio guardians of the tradition and how many of the world's bishops actually responded to the survey that preceded it. Now, the Pope had said the survey responses were one of the main reasons he had to write the motu proprio and limit the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass. He claimed that the bishops had a negative view of the Old Mass, when in fact, it seems they did not. For example, a bishop from the Philippines writes, the extraordinary form has become a treasure for the diocese from which to draw inspiration and concrete perspectives on how to renew the liturgical life of the Church. A bishop in England wrote, I think it's possible for the two uses, ordinary and extraordinary, to coexist. That could be a strength within the Catholic Church. Father Jerry, tying this back to the Synod, why have global surveys when it seems they have no impact on the final result? I mean, isn't this kind of just a dumb show?
Well, we need to avoid that perception and that reality. And, if you analyze the schedule that was originally given, it's a 24-month process leading up to the Synod in 2023. Only about 4 months of that were given to diocesan consultations. The rest were going to be on the level of the national hierarchy, then of continental hierarchies, and then it was going to be the synodal office issuing these working documents, 2 of them. So in other words, even though the synod was supposed to be this sort of everyone participates, essentially it was going to be in the hands of bureaucrats and the hierarchy. And what happened is, I think, a concession to reality. This thing could not be, if you really want to know what people think in the pews, to organize meetings, to produce documents, to have diocesan meetings, to discuss, you need more time. But what I think you really need is something clear, because having read the synodal documents that come out of Rome, it's all vague. It's all about, can't we all walk together on a journey of faith? And my answer is, if we know where we're journeying, what the meaning of the faith is, and if we're really walking in the right direction. That's what we need to know.
Well, and who's
because,
leading?
Quite frankly.
Yeah, who's leading the walk? That's my question.
Well, and where are we going? Because we need a church in which the Lord Jesus Christ is leading us to heaven. Everything else is a distraction. And we have to get back to that, because right now a lot of people identify religion with basically social justice warrior stuff, which is, that is subject to severe criticism. True social justice is that Christ reigns through our hearts and our hands in our societies. That's what we should focus on.
Okay. On Tuesday, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, head of the Holy See delegation to that 2021 UN Climate Change Conference, delivered Pope Francis's message to the summit taking place in Glasgow. In a letter to participants, the Pope wrote, "The wounds inflicted on our human family by the COVID-19 pandemic and the phenomenon of climate change are comparable to those resulting from a global conflict. Today, as in the aftermath of the Second World War, the international community as a whole needs to set as a priority the implementation of collegial solidarity and far-sighted actions. Bob, first of all, what do you make of the Pope's absence from Glasgow? He was originally set to appear at that conference. This is obviously a major focus for him, climate change. And is climate change like a global conflict?
Well, I don't have any information about why he decided not to go to Glasgow. It could be a health question. It could be that the other things are pressing. And I don't want to speculate about that, frankly. But this comparison of our situation after COVID and facing climate change to like a World War III, I wish that the Vatican wouldn't do this, because I think, you know, climate is something we can debate. It's unfortunate that the climate change question has kind of become polarized, so that, you know, you're either a denier or you're hysterical like Greta Thunberg is. There are serious things that need to be done, and these should be debated in a mature adult way. But to call this like a World War III, it just seems to me to be out of proportion to what it is. In World War II, 75 million people died. Has anything like that happened in whatever climate change exists? And by the way, right up until now, the jury is out on that. People see wildfires and they think that, you know, the world is burning up. In fact, last year there were fewer wildfires. There was less acreage burned than in the past. There are other indications of things that are more complicated than the kind of crisis or non-existing crisis that we hear about. So I think it doesn't help to stir up hysteria. It's good to encourage people to do good things, but I think a pope should speak in sober tones about this, encourage people, but not set up this kind of bogeyman, which in a way discredits what he actually says. It's very frustrating to me. I wrote an entire book about religion and environmentalism, and the Vatican turns to the most extreme people. When they talk about environment, when they hold events about it, they have the most extreme population controllers, people who want to reduce the size of the population, people who want to limit economic activity. It doesn't help to put yourself in that radical left-wing environmental world.
Yeah, and it should be noted, Pope Benedict was known as the Green Pope, by the way. So conserving in the environment, protecting God's creation, that is perfectly part of Catholic social teaching. It's a natural outgrowth. The question is the particular political prescriptions for doing so as we move forward. That is where things get thorny, and rather than laying out the moral principle, we're moving to direct prescriptions for dealing with it, and that can be debated. But now it's given a moral it's been lifted in the moral hierarchy to be an article of faith. If you don't sign on to the Paris Accords or the Glasgow Accords, you're somehow, you know, Antichrist. Something is shifting here, and we have to be very attentive to it. Father Jerry, building on something Bob just said, on Monday, Pope Francis appointed economist Jeffrey Sachs to the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. Now, Sachs is a China apologist. He's criticized the Biden administration for supposedly overstating China's abuse of Uyghur Muslims. He's also infamously in favor of population control. He championed initiatives to greatly reduce fertility rates in poor countries. That's a quote. And all of this seems to run counter to the Holy See's stance on abortion and contraception, and even its sense of nature. Earlier this year, Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Sorando, explained Sachs's unusually close relationship with the Vatican in recent years by saying he integrates the magisterium of the Church and of Pope Francis into economics by putting the human person and the common good at the center, end quote. Father Jerry, your reaction to Jeffrey Sachs' appointment to the Pontifical Academy, and do you accept Sorando's explanation of this relationship?
Well, I'll start with the Archbishop. What he says is not true, and that's propaganda. It has no support in the literature from Jeffrey Sachs. The fact that he accepts invitations to the Vatican doesn't make him an ally. He's trying to burnish his credentials, and of course, he wants to influence the Vatican to agree with his prescriptions. Now, as regards Sachs himself, this is basically the Vatican getting involved in signaling to the enlightened Western mentality, which is largely leftist, that we are in favor of a lot of what you say, and we want to be in dialogue with you. The problem with that is the world is going to come and say, okay, if you listen to our people like Jeffrey Sachs, don't talk about abortion, don't talk about birth control, certainly don't talk about, our favorite countries who are, solidifying their position by persecuting people. It's truly amazing. We'll get back to this China thing. It is truly amazing that the Catholic Church in China and Uyghur Muslims and others are being oppressed by the largest polluter in the world. And what is the reaction of the Vatican? Silence and a refrain that basically we're hoping for things in the future. Well, that's not a good policy. And, Catholics who donate to the Holy See and to their local parish, they don't expect that the people who are going to be advising the Holy See are actually its critics when it comes to the essential teaching. So we got a problem here, and it's very sad, and this is ill-advised in my opinion.
I only have one more minute, but I have to mention this, and Father, you reminded me. Bishop Peter Zhao Zumin was detained in China by authorities. The reason for the detention and his current whereabouts of this 58-year-old bishop remain unknown, according to local Catholic sources. Local officials reportedly said the bishop was taken away for tourism. Now, Robert, not a single word from the Vatican on this bishop, who was approved by the Vatican in 2011. Your thoughts on the continued silence from Rome?
It beggars belief. We know what the Chinese got out of that secret accord. We still don't know what is in that accord. It's never been published. I don't know what the Catholic Church got out of it, except further mistreatment at the hands of the Chinese communists, bishops being arrested, churches being pulled down, images of President Xi being put up inside churches. If you describe this to somebody who didn't know anything about contemporary politics, they would just think that this is crazy. And I think they'd be right.
Gents, we will leave it there. Thank you both for your insight. For commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you both. Brian Kilmeade is up next, but first I have to share something I'm very excited about. Between now and Christmas, I'm going on the Spider Who Saved Christmas book tour. I'll be stopping in Tampa, Florida, Mesa, Arizona, The Villages, Dallas, New Orleans, and Houston. I hope you'll come out and see me. I'll be sharing some stories. We'll talk about the book, and of course, I'll be signing your copies. They make great Christmas gifts. So go to RaymondArroyo.com. All the dates and locations are there. And for you folks in Tampa, I'll be at the Barnes & Noble on Saturday, November 13th. For more details on the Spider Who Saved Christmas book tour, go to RaymondArroyo.com. My next guest is the longtime co-host of Fox and Friends every weekday morning on the Fox News Channel. He's also a New York Times best-selling author. His latest, just out this week, is The President and the Freedom Fighter: Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and their battle to save America's soul. Please welcome back to the program, Brian Kilmeade. Brian, thanks for being with us. Before we get to this great book, I have to ask you about this week's big political upset when Republican Glenn Youngkin trounced Democratic former Governor Terry McAuliffe in Virginia. What fueled the outcome of that race, and what does it portend for these upcoming congressional elections?
I think there's a lot of things. I mean, I'll tell you what the stats say. What the Fox News analyst said, well, number one issue was the economy. Number two was the education. But there's a few things that happened along the way. Terry McAuliffe decided to run, I'm Terry McAuliffe. I was here before. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. That didn't work. I'm Terry McAuliffe. Donald Trump's a terrible person. This guy's like Donald Trump. Well, he's not. Okay, that didn't work. This guy wants to dominate education, like parents run education, and he thinks he's kissing up to the teachers union and teachers. So that didn't work. In fact, it boomeranged on him. And when he got desperate, then he brings in celebrities. That didn't work. So when it's all said and done, he imploded by choosing to go with Randy Weingarten in his last day and saying, oh, the first thing I'll do when I get the job back is I have an idea. Let's get rid of some white teachers and bring in some people of color. As I think Ian Pryor said, who put together some of these parental groups to battle against CRT, I thought he was trying to throw the race.
Oh, you know, he may have been. He certainly did a good job doing it. Look, during a press conference on Wednesday, President Biden was asked how much responsibility he took for the results in Virginia. Watch.
No governor in Virginia has ever won when he's of the same, or he or she's the same party as the sitting president. What I do know is, I do know that people want us to get things done. They want us to get things done. And that's why I'm continuing to push very hard for the Democratic Party to move along and pass my infrastructure bill and my Build Back Better bill.
Is the Build Back Better bill and more federal spending what people are really focused on, Brian?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a great idea. If your whole block's on fire, why don't you run down there with a flamethrower? I think that's the only thing you can do. It just makes no sense what he's saying. And what I think the undercurrent is, Raymond, is that his problem is not even with Republicans. He could sit there and try to act angry and sound off. His problem's with Democrats. And they're fighting in front of their parents, you know, in front of their kids. We're just sitting there watching on the side saying, you guys can't even decide how best to destroy the country. You can't pull off anything. So, number one, you could say that if he executed the deal, it would have made McAuliffe's loss even bigger. Or you could say if he executed the deal, it would have shown that Washington works. For me, the American people who looked at this, I think 40% had no idea what was in it. Zero. So 40% said, I don't even know, I can't even make an opinion yet. So I did think his assessment was terrible. And his press conference in Finland or Scotland was embarrassing.
Yeah, well, and with 2,000 pages, more than 40% of Congress people don't know what's in this bill. It was just released. Anyway, let's talk about your book, The President and the Freedom Fighter. This is your 5th historical book. Why the focus on American history? Obviously, it's greatly contested today.
Yeah, well, I worried, Raymond, that I was going to be doing a book that I'd have trouble talking about on Fox News, you know, when I started with George Washington's Secret Six, because we're into the news, right? If you have a biography on Joe Biden, you're going to be booked in the A block on every show, or Donald Trump, I get it. But now that all changed because there's so much of our past is now under scrutiny. There's so many people who want to get their screw gun and take down George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Jackson, and even Frederick Douglass. During the Black Lives Matter riots, they took down 2 Frederick Douglass statues. They should have put up 2 more Douglass statues. I mean, think about this. This guy was the ultimate abolitionist. Maybe Harriet Tubman has a slight lead. But are you kidding me? You were really clueless on our history. So I just thought this would be a great topic to talk about somebody who escaped from slavery and tried to make America a more perfect union. And I want to talk about a guy who escaped from poverty, who with 2 illiterate parents, who basically gave him 1 year of formal education combined, who ended up being 2 Hall of Fame human beings and arguably 2 of the most important Americans ever.
Yeah, well, Lincoln, obviously one of the most written about presidents. You focus your book on how he and Frederick Douglass intersected and how they really came to work together despite great differences. Lincoln inherited this divided country. He knew slavery was wrong, but he was slow to abolish it, fearing it would rip the country apart. Douglass, as you write about, wanted things to happen much faster. How did they first meet, Brian?
Well, it was Douglass. The reason why they met, I mean, as if they met. Frederick Douglass showed up for one of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. He was in the audience. And his name came up, by the way, and he would read all about it. And he had great hope for this Republican Party because they really got the sense that they knew how bad slavery was and were willing to say it. And he was the first nominee in Republican presidential party history. So he was always writing about him. And he saw that he had this big job, and a lot of his friends said, you have a problem with Lincoln, why don't you go talk to him? So he did what you could do back then. He got online outside the White House. And they walked up and they said, who are you, sir? He said, this is my card. They sent it up to Lincoln. He stayed online 5 minutes. And they brought him right to the front. In fact, the TV special on November 7th, I actually did the stand-up for roughly where Frederick Douglass stood in front of the White House. There was no fence. You literally waited on the porch. And I did a stand-up there. And then Douglass would immediately go up. And the minute he saw Lincoln, he said it was in a chair way too small with legs that would just spread out that seemed to go on forever. And he said he seemed to wear every wrinkle had a different part of the Civil War in his face. And he walked in and he said, Frederick Douglass, I know all about you. And Mr. President, he goes, take a seat. What do you want to talk about? And they hit it off. And they hit it off on real issues, not, can you show me pictures of your family? It was emancipation. What's taking so long? Why didn't you do it right away? Colonization. What was colonization about? We're Americans. We want to stay here. Why were you looking to put us elsewhere? And then here's what he's working on. Shows what he's working on. What about getting more African Americans into the armed forces? Let's do it. Can we get equal pay for them? Let's try to accomplish that. When the Confederate soldiers capture a black soldier, they kill and torture him. They don't do that to white soldiers. Fix it. You got it. You know, so they had a legitimate conversation. It was one of these things, and you meet these people sometimes in your life right away, and you meet people at work, and you say, I just get along with that guy or that girl. Great. And work well. Those are the two. And they were corresponding. They only would meet 3 times, supposed to be a 4th. It looks like Douglass had something else to do. Previous engagement, he had to give a speech. And then they met the final time after the inaugural at the ball at the party, when he looked at Douglass across the way when he walked in and said, my friend Douglass, what did you think of the speech? And he said, Mr. President, don't worry about me. You got a room full of people. He said, Frederick, there's nobody in this country I would like to know more about what they thought of my speech than you. And he said, sacred effort, sir.
Yeah, I'm working on a book about Lincoln for children, and people are amazed, and I was stunned at how Lincoln entertained people. Americans would get in line. They'd come up in the afternoons and have private audiences with him. You know, people looking for clemency, mothers of soldiers who were in prison begging for, you know, reprieves. He did take that time to really meet with Americans at a moment when the country was so divided. And as you said, they worked together to recruit African Americans into the military. Douglass even put his 2 sons into the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. But they faced a lot of resistance. How important was their relationship, Brian? And how relevant is it today vis-a-vis what we're seeing regarding race and how it's tearing us apart? What can we learn from their example, I guess, is the best way to put it.
A couple of things. Number one, how about forgiveness? He would write to Thomas Auld, who was his slave master, would loan him out to this horrible guy, Anthony, and would work known as a slave breaker. And then he would come out and he ultimately escaped from him. But he forgave him. And he just asked him some questions about his youth. He goes, I have nothing but, I'm done with you. I'm not mad at you anymore. He became this world-renowned speaker and intellectual who escaped from Thomas Auld and wrote about Auld in all detail in his biography that he wrote 7 years after escaping from slavery. And he forgave him. And we're walking around here 200 years from when slavery existed. And there's people that say, well, I can't forgive what happened in America. Really? If Frederick Douglass in his lifetime could forgive, and he experienced slavery, how dare we hold a grudge? Especially because we have a country to make better. We don't have time for this. And for Abraham Lincoln, the one thing I would take from both men, they're both self-made men. No one gave them anything. There was no social safety net. Now, I'm not telling you you're going to be president. I'm not telling you you're going to leave an abolitionist movement for your life. But whatever it is, obstacles are part of the game plan. What our country is trying to do is just clear the field for you to reach your potential. And that's all those 2 men wanted. And they cherished it. Even though he was born a slave, and many people looked at African Americans as a lesser race at the time. We learned the folly of that, and Benjamin Franklin would learn about it in his lifetime. I would say that if they could overcome that, I think it should give people reason to believe they can overcome anything. Don't tell me where your parents are. Don't tell me where you live. Don't tell me how much money you have. Just tell me what you want and go for it.
Yeah. Brian, before I let you go, on The View last month, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice addressed critical race theory and how history is taught in classrooms. This is what she said, and I want to tie it back to the book before we go.
One of the worries that I have about the way that we're talking about race is that it either seems so big that somehow white people now have to feel guilty for everything that happened in the past. I don't think that's very productive. Or black people have to feel disempowered by race. I would like black kids to be completely empowered, to know that they are beautiful in their blackness. But in order to do that, I don't have to make white kids feel bad for being white.
Brian, how does that track with Frederick Douglass's view on the inherent racism of people, especially children, for instance?
I mean, for children, he was convinced growing up, most of his best friends were white kids. And he was convinced that kids don't see color, even in his lifetime, that he would think it would take generations to understand for us to get over this imbued racist views that we might have had. But he's convinced kids don't see color, which means books like yours, the Lincoln book you're about to write, and the reason why you stand up for CRT is not because you want to win an election, is because you just want your kids not to grow up thinking they're less than or more than. And that's her point. And if she could sit there and watch some of her best friends be harassed and one burned alive in her building, if she could be in a segregated South and not be allowed to go to the movie theater until she was 18 years old, and that's Condoleezza Rice's view. She has no bitterness towards George W. Bush, her mentor, or George H.W. Bush, who was her original mentor. She has no bitterness towards anyone because of the color of their skin. If she could put it in perspective, how come we all can't?
Yeah, no, all of us are precious in the eyes of God, and color should have no bearing at all. Brian Kilmeade, I wish we had another hour. The President and the Freedom Fighter, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and their battle to save America's soul by Brian Kilmeade is available now at stores everywhere and online. Brian also has a Fox News special on November 7th. Thanks for being here, Brian.
Go get him, Raymond. I'll watch you tonight.
All right, my friend. Bye now. As you now know, the world over has hit a milestone. We are 25 years old, and it was impossible last week to fit all the segments in we wanted to, so I wanted to continue the celebration. As an author, you know, I love interviewing writers, and I've had the privilege of speaking to some of the greats. Whether they're discussing craft or their worldview, there's nothing like talking to a great storyteller. So here are a few, starting with Academy Award-winning screenwriter and author of The Exorcist, my pal, the late, great William Peter Blatty.
I went to Georgetown, and because of that scholarship, I was able to sit in the front row in theology class and listen to a Jesuit named Father Eugene Gallagher start telling the wildest stories about something called possession and an exorcism going on in the neighborhood. Wow. It never left my mind, and I thought immediately, if someone could ever document that case. I was nonfiction. I'm not. What a help to someone's faith it could be, to everyone's faith, especially mine. And that was the germ. Of course, I didn't realize then that that person would wind up being me.
How does your faith, and how did your faith shape that work, The Exorcist, which I would argue, because of it is such a in-your-face assessment of evil. You must look, and you're consequently also looking at its opposite without knowing it.
It was, again, from the start, an apostolic work. I mean, I wasn't expecting something big out of The Exorcist. But I'm a comic novelist. I would like it to be respectfully reviewed and not to get people poking fun at me, and then I'll go back to my career. But this is something I've always thought should be done.
Best-selling author James Patterson. How many collaborators do you have?
I don't know.
Ghostwriter.
Why? Are you looking for a job?
I might be. You know, I'll give you the resume on my way out.
I don't. I should, because that question gets asked occasionally. I don't know. I would say 7 or 8 probably.
How do you divide the labor? When
How does it work?
Yeah, right. You write the outline. You give
you
that
ready?
to
we alternate words. No, yeah, okay. No, I'll write a long outline. And then I suggest that I'd like them to contribute to the outline, partly because I want their contribution, partly because I want them invested, which is even more important. And then they go off, they do the first draft. I want to see pages every 2 or 3 weeks, you know, which is not the way publishers do it. No. Because a publisher, you work for a year and a half and it comes in and they go, oh, this isn't exactly what I was thinking. I was expecting something, you know, it doesn't work that way with me. After I'll be going like, great, keep going, or hold it, we're off the tracks, and let's talk about how it happened and what we do about it, et cetera. But it's a lot easier to deal with 2 weeks worth of writing than it is to deal with a year and a half polished, oh my God, my life is depending on this kind of thing. And then after I get a draft in, I will do however many drafts from one to...
You write repeated drafts of that one?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. How many normally?
And lately, it's more 1 and 2. In the past, it was more 3 and 4. But most of the people I work with now, I've worked with them for a while. They know, and we just have it.
You have the
one
process now.
Once the voice is established, it becomes a lot easier to do so. You know, that's why you can have a television series with maybe 8 writers.
Right.
Once the voice is in people's heads, they know how Tom Selleck is going to, how he's going to talk in Blue Bloods or whatever.
Right. So you're sort of the James Patterson showrunner. The queen of suspense, Mary Higgins Clark, gave us some writing tips that came in handy.
I write about very nice people whose lives are invaded. They are not looking for trouble. They are doing exactly what they should be doing, and something happens. And I think that maybe this is part of the reason that I've been blessed enough to be so successful. I think people walk in the shoes of the people in the book. They say, this could be me. This could be my daughter. This could be that sweet girl down the block this is happening to.
And even though terrible things, as you said, do happen to these people quite unexpectedly, in the end, everything seems to balance out. And there is a comfort, almost a reassurance in that. Are you aware of that as you're writing?
Well, you do realize that suspense, it is the sense of justice. The scales of justice have been balanced. The victim has been, her murderer, if it turns out to be that, has been caught. The justice is happening, and that's part of it. We all want the satisfaction of thinking that things are fair again.
I am told you occasionally off your enemies in your books. Is that true?
Oh, well, you know, I joke about that. You know, you have the plumber doesn't show up for the 3 months that the kitchen is being renovated. And I can visualize him.
Being bludgeoned over the head with a lead pipe. Oh,
no, I joke about the fact you can get all your meanness out, you know,
sure.
by murdering a few people, you know.
In print.
Purely in print.
Master novelist James Lee Burke.
I hit the wrong Rubicon with the Lost Get Back Boogie. That was the 4th book, viable book.
Right.
And I thought I would just publish it, but instead, I went 14 years before I got back in hardback. And that book was rejected 111 times. And my agent, Philip Spitzer, whom I met when he was driving a cab in Hell's Kitchen and running a one-man agency at night, kept it under submission for 9 years.
Oh, my God.
And we decided we'd just wear them down. I relearned this lesson during those years I couldn't publish, that if you never lose faith in the purpose for your gift. If you keep your contract with your higher power, the source of your creativity, eventually you'll see the reason for its presence in your life realized. I believe that absolutely, that God does not make mistakes. The teachings of Jesus are the most reasonable explanation for both our connection with the unseen world, and at the same time, it provides us with a way of living and contending with a world that in many ways we will never be compatible with. For me, it's the best way to live. I've tried other ways and they don't work as well.
Your cousin, Andre Dubus, said, I am a Catholic writer. I always look for what's the ethical question here.
Yeah.
Would you join that chorus?
Sure. I might rephrase it. I'm a writer who happens to be Catholic. But I talked to my good friend, Father Jim Hogan at Christ the King, our parish in Montana. He said, I was very complimented. He said, I just finished your new book. You're the most Catholic writer I've ever read. You ooze with Catholicism.
Best-selling novelist Dean Koontz rarely grants interviews, but he's granted us a few. The experience of your childhood looms large over your work and your life. Tell me about your father, Ray Koontz.
Well, my dad was, I didn't know what was wrong with my dad when I was a child. I didn't even know it until I was much later in life. But I knew he was an alcoholic because he was drunk much of the time. He had 44 jobs in 34 years. He would punch out the boss from time to time, and that's not a good move. And we never knew whether we were going to have a roof over our heads or where the food was coming from. My mom started working in a 5 and dime, and she was sort of the breadwinner of the family, but it wasn't much.
Had to be terrifying for you and your mother.
To a degree, and he would threaten to kill us frequently, but he would get into those things where life would go very badly for him. He had no faith, really, but then when things would go very badly and he would maybe end up in jail or in a bar fight or this or that, then he would suddenly take out the Bible and begin to read and declaim over it. And as a kid, I say this, it was a dark kind of childhood, but I was not an unhappy child. And when I first ever talked about it, I began to realize people thought, oh, what a poor, sad child. But in reality, even as a child, I knew that happiness was a choice. And you could always find something in the worst of times to make you happy. That didn't make the worst times go away, but it meant that there was a way out of this. And for me, very young, it became books. There were no books in our house, so I would get them from the library. And by reading, I discovered very important things. And number one was, not all families were like this. When you're growing up in that environment, you assume that this is normal. And when you find out it's not normal, that gives you something important to shoot.
The elegant short story writer and novelist Ron Hanson is always so perceptive and moving.
You write in the book that writing is a sacrament. Explain that for people. Some might hear that and go, huh? You know,
well, I'm looking at the very basic word sacrament, a visible sign of an invisible grace. And I think in moments when I'm really writing well, I'm in touch with God in the same way that I am when I'm at prayer. I feel intuitive. I feel that I know things I shouldn't know. And that when I'm writing as well as I can, there's a feeling of joy, even if it's a struggle. And I think that's the same thing that happens to us in a lot of our sacramental moments.
And indeed, you say here, what happens when you're writing is very close to what happens when you're at prayer. Explain that a bit, as I think that intrigued me when I saw it.
When you're reading or when you're talking, everything is located in your head. But when you're writing well, it feels like it's located in your soul or in your heart or whatever we call that central part of ourselves. And so it's not really your head. My head is what I use for revision, but the instinctive, natural part of me comes from someplace else, and that's exactly the same place I locate my prayer.
And humorist Dave Barry visited our set.
Your thoughts on this place over our shoulder here?
It's wonderful. I mean, as I say, if you look at your taxes as getting you some, useful service, no, you're going to be very depressed. But if you look at it as entertainment, it's like Vegas, but funnier, wackier.
Such amazing talents. We will continue to celebrate 25 years of the world over as we wind up 2021. Stay tuned for that. We really should have a party somewhere. Maybe I'll host one in New Orleans. I'm going to figure that out. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. Be sure to tune in next week. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.